Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Fun House, alongside, as always, my good friend, Mr. Martin Popoff. What's happening up in Canada, my friend?
And sir, well, I don't know. I feel like it's sort of like I said last time. Although it's gotten hot again, it's not exactly fall anymore. It's just really hot again up here. So yeah, but other than that, the weather's stable. We want stable, right? And unless we're talking like heat wave stuff, which I've been reading all about in the American Southwest. Wow, crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and we're just like, yeah, we got a little warmer again this week, but it's still dry as a bone. I mean, we haven't had any rain here where I live, and
Yeah.
it's just, I mean, it's to the point now where even like the trees, the leaves are just they're falling and they're just drying up because it's
Nice.
way early for that, way early.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
haven't had any rain in over 2 months, like significant rain, a couple
Wow.
showers,
Crazy.
brief showers here and there. So yeah, it's whatever. What are you gonna do? Anyway, we got a fun topic for you here today. So we wanted to kind of revisit album covers once again because we haven't done that in a while, and it's always a favorite of ours. So, but we wanted to go a little bit deeper than to just say, "Hey, these album covers are cool looking and whatnot." We wanted to kind of look behind it. So we came up with this concept of like album covers that you can hear or album covers that affect the listening experience of the actual album, whether it's in a positive or negative light. So we've each picked out 5 bands and 3 specific albums that do exactly that. So basically, we look at the album cover, we listen to the album, and somehow our either, in many cases, our love for the album cover sways our decision on what the album on the inside is, right? Again, positive or negatively. So we're going to go through each, take a pick of a band and 3 of our albums, and do a little show and tell and kind of explain our line of thinking on why we picked these. So I'll have Martin kick us off here.
Yeah. So I broke the rule a little bit. I forgot about the three. I've actually got more in most of these cases. But the thing is, we both know these albums so well that we can talk about them off the top of our heads as well. We can picture other ones in our minds, and so can the viewers as well. But so I wanted to start with the band that made me sort of feel strongest about this idea because, well, I'll start even with the album that kicked off this whole idea. I mean, ACDC Back in Black. To me, this record is one of the happiest, partyingest records. I remember it being a grad '81 staple, in high school kind of thing. And like every one of these songs is like a complete party rock and banger, except for maybe I suppose Hell's Bells. Really, it's really the darkest song on it. But other than that, this album cover completely changes your it or it greatly affects, I don't know about completely changes your listening experience of that record. So yeah, that's one where it almost feels like the biggest gulf, where you've got absolutely insane, bright, happy party record, you know forgetting about the whole thing about the death of Bon Scott. It is that anyways. I mean, it's the record isn't awake, they only made the album cover awake, right? Um but yeah, that's the one with the biggest gulf. And then it got me thinking about Dirty Deeds. This is a crappy Hypnosis cover, one of their not great ones. But this album is almost like Flintstone rock. I mean, it's literally like just really simple primary color boogie rock, happy stuff, and then that makes it look makes it adds a level of mysteriousness to it, and even a little bit of transgressiveness with the covered up eyes sort of thing. And then I thought of this immediately, where, I mean, this album cover, swear to God, it always made me think it was a little more of a country album. This and this same, this is like the Brown Sound album, the badly analog too puffy thing, and this kind of has a real brightness about it. And I'll just say, as a group, then, to close up on ACDC, the idea that later on ACDC had this feeling that they were such a huge corporate band that they almost like went way beyond being these lovable little personalities that you knew, to the point where the album covers got so simple, and it almost made it look like my latest episode of or my next episode of History in 5 Songs, the audio podcast, is about self-titled albums, but also the idea a little bit of untitled albums, and then also a little bit of albums that are called 2, 3, Vol 4 kind of thing. And these later AC/DC album covers almost feel like uncovered albums where they didn't really come up with anything for much for an album cover. It's just almost like they're saying, you know, and it's not even true because the album covers later are weaker. They're saying almost that you don't need an album cover. We don't have to deliver an album cover. The music will speak for itself. You know, that kind of idea, right? So, and they put Angus on a pedestal, and it's only Angus, and they're
Right, because all of a sudden it's not a band anymore. It's all about Angus.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, and that affects it. So you're hearing that, right? You're hearing, oh, somebody in corporate is trying to make a superstar out of just Angus in this band or something, right? So you're getting all these weird signals, and they're not great album covers, and they're also on not great albums in a way. So that is always a little annoying, and that bothered me. That feels a little bit like the Van Halen thing too, with Van Halen 2, and even Women and Children First, and Diver Down. You know, they're almost like saying, well, we're so great that you don't need an album cover. We're not going to waste time on giving you an album cover. We're just gonna, you know, it's the music inside that matters, sort of thing. And it's sort of, so that bothered me a little bit about AC/DC. But yeah, there's some ideas of this idea of the album cover, you know, joggling, you know, screwing with your sort of you know, appreciation of the album, either making it better or worse, but at least changing it.
That's a good, a really good pick. For my first one, I decided and I'm kind of going to go all over the place with the positive and the negative. This one is all positive. So sometimes you have these bands and their artwork are going to make you think and reminisce about other bands and their artwork that, you know, really worked. And it's kind of like a play on that. So I remember the first time that I got introduced to Marillion, you know, what are some of the things that came to mind? First of all, wow, it's like reminds me of, like, you know, Roger Dean or Paul Whitehead, you know, who did Yes and Genesis, right? It's like that whole kind of like conceptual, kind of really fantastic fantasy looking thing. And here you got, you know, obviously the Jester, and you know, so in the end, once you dive a little bit deeper into these albums and you really start to look at, you know, the front and the back covers, you see all these little things that are going on, right? There's the Jester again, and all that. And all of a sudden, the artwork really visually makes references to things that are going on in the lyrics. And there's this little consistency from album to album to album where little things on the covers are referencing songs and lyrics from an album or two before. And all of a sudden, it really gives these albums a lot of credibility that they actually put so much thought into what they were doing that it makes you more invested in the albums and the music. And one of the things that, and again, subconsciously, maybe this has happened, is that I got so used to experiencing this with this band during the Fish era, and they kind of stopped doing that in the Hogarth era, where you had these album covers that may or may not have had anything to do with the music, and some of them are not appealing to the eye whatsoever. And for many, many years, I just became less invested in that era of the band and kept going back to this, because to me, this seemed like they really gave a shit about the total package. And it somehow made me more loyal to these albums than to the later ones. You know, in recent years, I've kind of changed my tune a little. I still favor this stuff, but I have changed my tune on the more recent albums. And sorry, I look at them differently because I'm not as much interested in the album cover art as I am just the music overall. And again, maybe, you know, we've talked lots of times about how when you're younger and you're first starting getting into music and bands, and before you get your start in life with, you know, getting married, buying houses, working, and all that stuff, you had the time to really invest in stuff like this with album covers attached to music, not attached to music. Does the album cover affect the way you love the album or not? So I thought this was a fantastic first choice, because to me, I totally think that one of the reasons why I love Marillion so much, the early Marillion, not just the music, is these album covers are spectacular. And even today, after having these forever, I can sit and look at these and I'm like, wow, yeah, that is from that song, that's from She Chameleon, that's from Script for a Jester's Tear, all these little references. And to me, that's fascinating. And that's part of the whole getting into an album, right? The artwork is part of it. And I think this has positively, the way they laid their albums out, has certainly positively affected me on their music. Whereas the lack of attention to these kind of details on more recent Marillion hasn't affected me as much as these do.
Yeah, that's a great choice for a number of reasons. And you're right. I mean, later on, the illustration speaks of prog and all that complexity speaks of prog. And then later on, it's almost like they're saying, well, we're not just a prog band anymore, sort of thing. So you got minimalist illustration or photography or something. And it's, there's just not as much there. And then I always think back to the whole EMI, them being on EMI situation of possibly looking at what a mascot did for Iron Maiden. So they had the mascot thing.
100%. Yeah.
Which is an added feature, right?
Yeah.
And the famous example is Eddie, how that adds to your enjoyment of Iron Maiden. It's like this extra member of the band. He's kind of the most exciting guy in the band, right?
Yeah. So, and, using the same artist, right? This is Mark Wilkinson, who, went on to work with Judas Priest as well. But that was a thing. A lot of these bands, they use the same artist album after album after album, with that whole mascot thing. So it's consistency. It's what it's all about.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So my next choice is King's X. And I actually, looking at bands in the CD era, it was actually a little tougher to do this. So I'll go through this and sort of explain here. I cycled out Anthrax, for example. I decided I didn't want to talk about Anthrax, but so yeah, let's try this with King's X. So basically, at the beginning, this almost feels a little bit like the Marillion thing, where there's some complexity and interestingness to the early album covers. So you've got, good complex illustration, which adds you to thinking they're a prog band. I mean, they're great albums anyways. But the other thing that I find is an added feature is there's a consistency of look between these early ones with that type of illustration. Of course, you've got the consistency here, where you've got kind of a strong image in the middle on a black background, with some shape to it. And, all the elements, the text elements are in the same place. So you always put these two together. And then later on, it feels a little bit like they're trying to message to us that they're a little more of a jam band, psychedelic band, doing some other things. And you certainly get that feeling here. And then affecting the albums negatively a little bit is a little bit of the whole kind of Metal Blade era, where the album covers were not quite so good. So at one point you're kind of thinking, and then also, I mean, I love Tapehead, but consistently kind of at the bottom of the list for King's X fans is Bulbous and Manic Moonlight, and they're not great album covers. They're not very communicative album covers. They're just sort of weird, a little bit spooky. They're not warm. Yeah, and the new one, there you go. So the new one is I just interviewed Doug for that album, and he was saying that album cover, what did he say exactly? Like, we're not a dark band, so we wanted a light thing. We don't particularly have a lot of darkness to what we're doing. And then he compared it to their XV, their 15 album. And he said on that one, we were in a dark place and I was wearing every symbol. I was trying to remember when he's telling me this, what is he talking about? And then I went and looked at the album cover. He goes, I'm wearing every symbol known to man. So he's got I think he's got a pentagram on and a cross, it's a photo. It's them standing. It reminds me of the Trouble album cover. They're kind of standing out in the bushes sort of thing. And this band shot, but they're all kind of dressed in black and all this. And so I think he was trying to tell me that there was a little bit of a reaction to that album and that album cover, but this is just good, clean graphics. And then when it's just graphics like that, it's not particularly speaking to you or adding too much to it. It's just that you're almost back a little bit to the whole Van Halen 2 later AC/DC album feel.
Yeah, I mean, this album cover does absolutely nothing for me. However, I think the back is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Right. And, one of the things, too, which we really haven't even mentioned, and it's, the logos. King's X had that consistent logo for the first couple of albums, and then they just kind of did away with that. And now every album's got something a little bit different. And same thing with the Marillion. I mean, they had that consistent logo for the first bunch of albums, and then they just forgot about it. And that's something that you identify with as well.
Yeah.
All right. My next pick is going to be Alice Cooper. So, and I'm going to go in a little different order than what I originally wrote down here. So I'm going to start with like Love It to Death. Okay. So if you were listening to Alice Cooper prior to this album, okay, so those first two albums, you know, especially Easy Action, we'll talk. So on Easy Action, on the front cover, you've got them from the back, and it's in bright kind of psychedelic colors. They get the long blonde hair, and then on the back, you get the picture of them from the front, and they kind of look goofy, wear like a bunch of long-haired hippies, and you know, there's nothing really menacing or anything about it. It's just like it basically. You look at that and you kind of get a hint for what the music is going to be on the inside, right? And as such, I'm not a huge fan of those first two Alice Cooper albums. I mean, for what it is, it's okay. But then they released this album, and here we see them again, right? But it's in black and white, and all of a sudden, there is a sense of menace and darkness to the depiction of them, the image of the Alice Cooper band. Now, all the greasy blonde hair and everything, you can't see that. All you see are these, you know, five guys looking kind of grungy. They look like hard rockers. They look kind of like menacing. It's a little on the shocking side. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, well, now we want to be taken seriously. That's kind of what this whole screams. And then once you, and maybe I could use the term glam, right? The first album looked more like glam. This definitely looks more serious. And you can kind of hear the band going in a different direction as soon as you start listening to the album. So it's almost like this is the dark album as opposed to Easy Action, which was the bright, cheery, we're just kind of a fun, greasy glam band. And now this artwork to me always signaled the arrival of the hard rocking, shocking Alice Cooper band. You got songs like, you know, I'm 18, Black Juju, right? You got the whole second half of the album is all dark and gothic and menacing. And to me, it's a perfect marriage. They did exactly what they set out to do. The cover image basically depicts perfectly the type of music that they're now moving into. And that, you know, obviously then you get, you know, this Killer, which it's red, okay, which is kind of cool, kind of different. You get the snake. Everybody always personifies snake with dark and evil, right? Snakes are scary. And then the album is called Killer, and the writing is exactly in lettering like a serial killer would do. You know, we've seen this in movies all throughout the years where the serial killer would send a note, leave a note for the police department, right, to say what I'm doing next and whatever, and they have to sign it or write it in lettering that's not going to give away their actual handwriting. So, I mean, it looks like a child wrote this, but it's actually genius. And again, the darkness and the kind of the evil kind of intent that they gave with this whole album cover again is all over this, you know, halo of flies, you know, dead babies, killer, all this stuff. And to me, it's like it's a perfect album cover for this music, and it kind of gets you into what it's all about. And then, you know, Alice leaves the band and starts up the solo career, and you got Welcome to My Nightmare. So this album to me screams it's me, myself, and I now. I'm the grandmaster. In this, you know, he's looking all theatrical. Is he serious? Is he sinister? He's dressed in black. He's got the makeup on, the top hat, and you got all the, you know, the insects and everything all over the place. So I think, you know, the first time you see this, it really strikes you. And again, once you get into the album, everything that's kind of on this album cover, the darkness, the theatricality of it, the bugs, all that kind of stuff, all the songs are represented here. You know, I mean, Cold Ethel, you know, Steven, Black Widow, Devil's Food, Welcome to My Nightmare. It's just, you get a little bit of everything on here. But again, the album cover points to him. It's all me now. And that's exactly what this album is all about. You can tell this is the arrival of Alice Cooper, the solo artist. So I thought this was also a good choice because I think these covers get you ready for what's inside. And I think positively affect your grasping and understanding of the albums.
Exactly. Understanding is one thing, and also just they make you like them more. I mean, it adds to them. The album covers just add to the whole package. They're an extra element, and it's affecting the way you're hearing it as well. It's possibly even making it even darker than it even is.
And if I wanted to spend more time on Alice Cooper, I could have pulled out a handful of albums where the album cover is so bad and so just like nondescript that it has negatively affected my enjoyment or lack of those particular albums, because there's plenty of Alice albums that do the opposite as well, where it's almost like they didn't give two thoughts about what the album cover was going to be and just kind of threw it out there. And you listen to, you're like, okay, this, whatever, and then you listen to it, you're like, yeah, okay, whatever, and it's just like you just have no reaction to it all. And I have a handful of those as well for him.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's and when that happens again, to reiterate, it almost feels like they just let corporate take over. They let the art department of the record company have their say, and their say is usually less interesting than the creative say of Dennis and Alice working together, kind of
thing. Like Lace and Whiskey comes to mind. I'm kind of like, that cover's just whatever. And to me, that album is kind of like, it's okay, but it's like, with a more impactful cover, would that have kind of like worked its wonders with my mind? And possibly.
Yeah. And then later on, you've got Trash, and the album's called Trash, right? Yeah. And Raise Your Fist and Yell, where you've just got an Alice dressed up in his makeup on the cover, end of story sort of thing, right? All right, so my next choice, back to the A part of the very start of the record collection with Accept. So some of their album covers don't really affect what I think of the music inside, but I always thought this album cover made me think krautrock. Everything about this, speaks an album on Brain when it first came out. Even the band shot on the back. So this almost made me think it very German, but it had a little bit of that artistic element that raised what was inside, which is actually kind of like pretty punky, carnal, well written but not well performed or recorded hard rock. It's kind of loose bolted, this album, but I always thought this kind of helped out in making it feel krautrock. And then when we get to Balls to the Wall, I often thought that this album cover was, everybody kind of makes fun of it, but it's certainly a big artistic sort of step up from what had come before with Breaker, and then we've got where do we got here? So we've got Restless and Wild had that, which made me think new wave of British heavy metal, and that was the other cover. A little bit different art, but it made it look like a live album, which didn't really help. But to me, this makes me think the music inside is classier and more well thought out and put together, and that's actually the truth. That this was a very meticulously recorded album. And very super smooth, uniform sounds, really tight, less wild than Restless and Wild, right? So that kind of helped with that. And an odd thing about this one is it's made me think they're part of the whole American marketing kiddie metal thing. It was not a good album cover for what was inside. I thought what was inside was classier than the album cover. So that's one that sort of hindered the whole thing. And then a funny thing is these three album covers in a row are all not much on them, and they're all black and red. And it makes all the songs on these three albums just meld together for me. I don't know which songs are on which. They just seem so similar to me. And then the same thing kind of happens later on, where they have all these great looking album covers of the new Mark Ternillo era, and they're all kind of the same color. And they're really good albums, but they're really almost two perfect albums. And the songs are kind of interchangeable because the production is perfect and really good. The whole Andy Sneap thing we talk about. But again, the uniformity of them, the album covers kind of makes you think about the uniformity of the music in a detrimental way. So you're not, so they had that happen twice. They had it happen in that whole semi, grungier, darker era. And then they had it happen with the Mark Ternillo era.
Yeah, that's a good choice. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like almost like with those the more recent ones, you can't say anything bad about them because they're all really good, but
Yeah.
they are kind of interchangeable, and the covers are interchangeable. There's like nothing. I don't think any of those, with the exception of maybe Stalingrad, which kind of has a striking cover. All the rest of them are just kind of like, even now I'm like trying to think of a few of them, and I'm like, I can't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and they're really good because that's what happens in the CD era. Everything is perfect, and that's what made this kind of hard because there's less, to pick modern stuff is there's, we've gotten into so many subgenres of subgenres of subgenres that the album covers seem to be a lot more strict than they were in Black Sabbath's era with the Aussie years and stuff
Yeah.
like that, right? Where they were just kind of weirdly all over the place, right?
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. All right, so my next pick is kind of a strange one, but it was actually interesting to kind of look at this band, and the way I approached the Grateful Dead is to think of what are my favorite albums by them and why, and if that has a connection to the album covers, and then what are some of my least favorite albums from the Dead and why, and if the album covers have a connection to that. And that indeed was the case. So I looked at a couple of my favorite albums by them, and I stopped and think, well, it's like, well, what do I really like about the Grateful Dead? Well, I personally, and you and I are going to differ greatly on this one, and that's actually one of the reasons why I chose this, because I think you might be able to speak to something here. I like the psychedelic era of the Grateful Dead the best. I like the noodling and the strange things they did and the long jamming and all that, and that to me really speaks to me, and I like that much more than the folky kind of country rock Grateful Dead, which I don't mind, but it's not my favorite. So I looked at the two albums that are among, if not my two favorites, among my favorites. And one of them, however the hell you say this, Oxomoxoa, whatever, however this is pronounced, I can never figure it out. And look at that striking Rick Griffin album cover. It's amazing. And again, it's another one of those album covers where you stare at and you're like trying to look at all the little things that are going on there. And then you listen to the album, and it's like the album kind of sucks you in the same way that the artwork does. You got, and there's some of my favorite great Dead songs are on here. St. Stephen's on here, China Cat Sunflower. I mean, Dupree's Diamond Blues. To me, this is just a great late 60s Grateful Dead album. It's got all the little noodlings and the strangeness and the little bits of blues and whatnot. But again, if it had a plain block cover, I don't know if it would, I still really like it, but would it draw me in as much, because I'm just as excited listening to the music as I am looking at that cover. And even more so with Blues for Allah, which has, to me, one of my favorite album covers of all time. I bought a shirt that's got this on it. Philip Garris did the artwork. It's got a like a skeletal fiddler. How cool is that? As a guy who loves, prog and metal, there's something kind of both here. It's got the skeleton, it's got the fiddler, the colors. This just to me screams like prog. And the music is also got that psychedelic feel. It's got the prog feel. It's got a little bit of fusion on it. It kind of covers it all. Again, some of my favorite Dead songs are on here. I love the depiction of the band on the back cover. It's wonderful artwork. And this is by far my favorite Grateful Dead album. And it's by far my favorite album art for them. Is that a coincidence? Perhaps. Again, if it just had a shitty album cover that's, whatever, would I like this as much? I don't know. But on the opposite end, I went and looked at some of my least favorite Grateful Dead albums, and ironically, I don't really like the covers of any of them. So Working Man's Dead, which a lot of people cite as one of their greatest albums, right? There's songs on here, Uncle John's Band, Casey Jones. There's very, very popular Grateful Dead tunes on here, but yet because I'm not much of a fan of kind of folk rock or country rock, this is one of my least favorite Grateful Dead albums, even though I should really love this album because most people do. And it has a completely non-psychedelic cover. It's just, this picture of these, the band sitting on the corner, right? They got the hats on. It's like, whatever. It's in black and white. Then you got this real kind of old rootsy, paintings of all the guys in the band. So it's almost like, for me, I'm not invested in the album artwork at all. And I'm not as interested in the music. And it's like the album that came after, The American Beauty, I'm kind of the same with. I don't really care about the album art, and I don't really care much about, I don't dislike the album or that album or this album, But when I look at the catalog of the Grateful Dead, it sits down, lower down, which I know to Grateful Dead fans, that's kind of blasphemy, but that's just the way I am with this band. I really like the kind of wild, psychedelic, adventurous Grateful Dead, and the kind of safe, hanging out with the acoustic guitars. Doing that, to me, that doesn't appeal to me as much. And the artwork has something to do with it as well. So I know you have comments on that, because I know you love this stuff.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that album cover, it reminds me immediately of ZZ Top's first album in Rio Grande Mud, and obviously there's an Eagles album cover that looks quite a bit like that, with them walking, dressed up in the cowboy stuff, right?
Yeah, that's
so yeah, I think that the most important thing, in terms of my association of their album covers with their music is I think the enjoyment of the music is greatly enhanced by having the skeleton mascot and the roses and all that stuff. Yeah. So that stuff adds a layer of evilness that doesn't really feel like it's really in the music very much. So it's almost like, here's the music, but there's this extra thing we want you to see in it. And it's a little foreboding. It's about mortality and the occult and all this sort of stuff. So that's really cool. Like, and the rose thing makes you think Rosicrucians, secret societies and things like that. But my favorite era of the band, I love that era of the band, but also I like the Donna and Keith years. So your Terrapin Station and Shakedown Street, which have kind of goofy album covers, which make you think kind of like Smoking Pot. They're kind of like the stoner album covers, like the sort of like underground comic album covers, right? And then later on, when they're just on the cover of the last few or couple or whatever it is, it doesn't say much to you about anything. It's like putting them on the cover is like, it's neither here nor there, right? And there's some bad type styles and stuff, but yeah, Blues for Ella, what an amazing cover. That also looks like a raging heavy metal cover, like it'd be a great Black Sabbath cover,
right? I mean, it could be a prog or a metal cover. I mean, it could be either, and it's just so spectacular for it. I am like constantly like blindsided by how much I love this album cover. It's just so good. And even the back, I love the way they depicted the band on the back, because it makes them, it's all in gold and it just makes them look mythical. It's genius and one of the great album covers of all time. And again, it's the album is fantastic for me. I know other Grateful Dead fans who also cite this as one of their favorites, but I think I always gravitate towards this album. And again, the album cover has a lot to do with that, I think. It's funny you mentioned ZZ Top before, because I didn't even consider them. And they have a lot of crappy album covers, but it never has hindered my enjoyment of them. Like you mentioned, the first two, either the third album, those are all like, but great albums. That's one of those bands where I don't think a bad album cover really hinders my enjoyment of them. I guess maybe because I never really had any great album covers, we just didn't care. We're like, all right, ZZ Top is not going to give us a good album cover. We just got to enjoy it on the merits of the music alone. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think about them. I mean, some of them are pretty cool illustrations in that, and you can tell they're pushing the brand of these three guys having a certain look all the time. But it's a different look, as we move through time. But it's the strong thing about the look. Sometimes the logo is there, sometimes not. I mean, they're colorful. They're almost like better versions of those simple Van Halen or AC/DC album covers in a way. They're just like nicer designs, but they don't kind of knock your socks off.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Yeah, and just to reiterate a little more on that Grateful Dead thing. So it makes you think of the Bad Acid Trip and the bikers and like all the kind of the dark side of the hippie generation thing, which again, it the music seems to be more or less relentlessly, kind of like good vibes and love and happiness and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, you put that layer on it of the skeleton and the roses and all that, and it just starts having a cool darkness added to it, right? Yeah. Okay, so my next choice, another kind of a difficult one here, that I wasn't sure what I was going to say about it, but Voivod. So the whole Voivod situation feels a little bit like these early albums are really quite harsh, but yet they're elevated by the the uniformity of the color schemes, Michelle's great artwork, the fact that there's a recurring story, the kind of weird space story, nuclear stuff all mixed in. So, musically, you might be more or less turned off. You may not be as turned on by the music alone if you didn't have this cool sort of narrative going on with these album covers and the weird name of the band and stuff. So I think it really helps early on because the music is actually quite harsh.
Yeah.
And you know, if you didn't have all that, it might feel a little bit more like, let's lump these guys in with that short genre called speed metal or early German thrash, that kind of a thing. But because they have that, it helps. As you move on, you've got the well, okay, so in the middle you've got the era where you got the slightly more proggy Voivod, and again, it sort of continues, but it feels a little more druggy and acid trippy, I think, and again, that sort of helps. And then like we talked about, King's X in the Metal Blade years, you've got the sort of the kind of dark period of metal where things aren't as successful, and Eric Forrest is in the band, and you've got the Hypnotic Records years where the artworks are just Michelle's experimenting with computer graphics, which are just sort of young. There's probably their worst album of all time that you could possibly imagine. But during this era, it just feels like you could see that they had less money and the band was on kind of a low, they were a trio and Eric Forrest singing and all this. I love those records. I go back to them and play them a lot, but they are harsher. They're more harshly recorded. They're a little bit Jugulator, Demolition-y. So a little bit that this is kind of cool. This is the Negatron little metal box thing that came out. And then later on, you kind of get the sort of you think about the Jason years where it looked like there was some more hype around them and a little bit more money was put into it, and the graphics look a little more corporate. And this is embossed and it's a digipack and all that. And then just kind of the last one I wanted to point out is Michelle sort of reminding us that they have kind of a they have a love of punk and a hardcore past to them as well. So it's cool to see something like this that reminds you of their underground punk cred as well. All through the whole catalog, you get different signals, some good, some bad, but mostly just good, because all of that stuff, by having your drummer being this awesome, illustrator and graphic artist and type style creator, inventor, really helped the band all along the way.
Yeah, those album covers were always quite unique, and they always had a DIY ethic to them, which is exactly what it was. And I remember buying Roar and Killing Technology, in the store, never heard them before. And I was like, I really dig these album covers. And I remember taking them home, and you said harsh before. And that's exactly what I thought. I was like, oh, I'm not sure I like this. Because it was kind of harsh. I mean, Away's vocals, early on were kind of like, they were a little bit on like Kronos from Venom. And if you weren't really a fan of that, and I at the time I was kind of like hit or miss with Venom. And to me, the early Voivod stuff it was definitely weirder music, faster music, and there was kind of like this weird futuristic kind of element going to all about the music and the arrangements. But it took me a few years to kind of really start to get into Voivod a little bit more. I think when they injected a little bit more prog into their music, a little more melodicness, and you could see it changing with the album covers as well. That's when I finally started to see, okay, now I think I get all this. But I had to kind of get through a couple of years of, not really sure where I am with these guys before I was all in.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. All right. So, how about Motorhead? I think for me, a band that, for the most part, throughout their career, a lot of albums we're talking about, pretty consistent album covers. And I think, from the logo to the sort of mascot, whatever, or even when they had them on the cover, you saw a Motorhead album in the racks in the record store, and it just screamed badass, right? I mean, I'll never forget the first time I saw this. I was like, I have to own that. I mean, what is it? I don't know, but this just screams like That's just killer. That is so badass. It's so heavy. It's so it just screams attitude. And and then again, I've talked about it before. I'll talk about it again in a couple minutes. You throw some great live shots of the band on the back, I'm sold. So this pulled me in. This was it. Give you my money. And then again, how badass do they look? You can't deny this. And even this may not be one of their better albums, but I think for me, I rank this one probably higher than most because I absolutely love the album cover. I mean, how cool is it, with the fist and those evil looking rings, with the skeletons, and it's great. And even like I said, all throughout their career, they had really, really cool album covers. Even like Another Perfect Day, which obviously signaled the arrival of a new guitar player just for briefly in Brian Robertson. I mean, even that cover is kind of a little bit different than the ones that came before it. You still have the mascot on the front. You have Snaggletooth there, but it's kind of like almost like the way it was painted. It's kind of like this acid wash type of thing. And it gives it like this kind of psychedelic look to it, which, I think that was meant to suggest that things are going to be a little bit different here. And it was. But all the albums that came after, man, just so many great album covers. And I think we got used to that consistency from this band all throughout their career. You got the same logo, you got the same cool album covers, and most people have pretty positive things to say about almost every Motorhead album. And I think one of those bands that really the only bad thing you can say about them is maybe they put out too many albums too quickly, for a period of time, like in the 90s and the early 2000s, they were just cranking out albums left and right. And it was almost hard to keep up with them. But to me, I was always fascinated with the Motorhead albums, and it was always the gateway to draw you into whatever they were doing on the inside. And in most cases, you got pretty cool album covers, pretty cool albums. And it just was like a perfect match all the way through.
Yeah, and like Grateful Dead, they got associated with bikers. It really had this biker look to them, and they weren't bikers at all, these guys. But it became like this kind of bikerish band, right? And then the gothic, and the fact that it's actually on an arc like that, it looks like colors on the back of a jacket, right?
Yeah,
and they would do that, and then an image, and then some other text or whatever, and it really looked like a rocker, the back thing, right? Yeah, I remember getting that as well, and just the colors on Overkill are so cool, right? They're not that metal colors, but they just make it so metal. They almost make like light blue, a metal color, just by doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I mean, we've been talking about that for 40 years about how most people consider Motorhead like one of the great metal bands of all time, and then you got Lemmy who said it a million times. It's like, we're not a heavy metal band, we're just a rock and roll band. It's like, so again, it goes back to what is rock, what is metal, and where's the line drawn. And when the leader and founder of the band says they're not metal, but the rest of the universe considers them metal, it's like it's this weird conversation that. But all these album covers, they're some of the best metal album covers of all time, right? But
I wonder if we'd all like distinguish all those albums that came all in a row even more if they didn't have the logo on some of them and really changed up the album cover. Because what's the green one? There's the one where there's just got the three guys on the cover. So they changed it up a little bit here or there, and there's some. I think one of them, maybe Snake Bite Love, puts the logo off in the corner or something.
Yeah.
But I wonder if the album covers weren't so beautifully consistent, with these records that are also really consistent. I wonder if they really changed up the album cover and got rid of the logo and did something really artsy on one of them. You would have thought the music inside was different as well, right?
That's very possible.
Yeah.
That's very possible. And that's why I brought up Another Perfect Day, because for me, that was kind of the weird outlier on the 80s albums where, even though it still looks like a Motorhead album cover, it's very different. And the album itself is very different. So I think they did that on purpose.
And then you get the, because this always reminds me, I always put the two together, but you get that weird No Remorse album, which is like a greatest hits with some extra stuff. And the album cover looks so much like March or Die and Iron Fist and probably various, dodgy comps and live albums that you start getting confused about them. And that's always why I always hesitate when I talk about David Bowie, Sound and Vision, Heroes, Changes 1, Changes 2. Like the album covers are so similar.
Yeah.
It's that it really starts confusing you, sort of thing.
Yeah, the lines get blurred a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. My last choice is Budgie. Now I wanted to pick this one because I think early on, this is one where the album covers add to it, but they also distract you and change what you think of what's inside. Because you look at the early album covers and they look like, Vertigo Records prog albums or heavy prog albums of some sort. But the fact of the matter is these early Budgie albums are pretty conservative, bluesy, dense metal. Despite the funny, the different lengths of songs, the short ones, long ones, the funny titles, but they definitely look quite prog. You've got early Roger Dean going on there. This looks kind of metal. This essentially lines up with what's inside. But you look at Best of Budgie and it looks totally prog, right? Prog, and again krautrock. I mean, krautrock has a lot of these fantasy kind of album covers, a lot of illustration. And then later on, I remember this is the first Budgie album I ever bought on, sight unseen, didn't know anything about him on a trip to Spokane. But this is a funny one where you think super exotic album cover. But the songs, again, despite the weird titles and the weird lengths of them and the 3A and B and all that stuff, they're pretty conservative meat and potatoes rock and roll. I mean, you would, it's heavy, granted, but I think with more pedestrian covers, like this band would have less people would have thought of them as a heavy metal band or a slightly proggy heavy metal band. And then later on, you've got, your Deliver Us from Evil comes out at the end of the new wave of British heavy metal, and that looks like a totally metal album cover. And by this point, they're not very metal at all.
No,
it's called Deliver Us from Evil. And then this one actually does match up perfectly with the new wave of British heavy metal. It looks like your cheesy, crappy new wave of British heavy metal album cover, and this is their heaviest album, right? But then oddly, this early Derek Riggs one, again, issued right in the middle of the new wave of British heavy metal, is not very heavy at all. So this kind of, I always line this one up with sort of your Uriah Heep Abominog. They're both coming out right in the new wave of British heavy metal, super new wave of British heavy metal album covers. Your shirt, Wishbone Ash has one of those, right? Raw to the Bone. Same kind of thing, right? Where you're thinking raging metal, and it's not that metal. So that's the kind of thing about that early Derek Riggs one. So yeah, Budgie at times, I think generally they benefited from those album covers because they're all pretty striking. And at times it lined up and at other times it didn't. And I think of albums like Impeccable, where it doesn't really say much to me at all. It's just kind of there. I do like that album. But funny band. I think definitely early on you would have thought they were a little fancier and more proggy than they actually were, because it's actually kind of like stodgy dated Black Sabbath.
Here's the question: if Roger Dean had never done a couple album covers for them, because I talk to people all the time who are prog fans that always want to talk about Budgie as a prog band, would that even happen were there no Roger Dean album covers?
Exactly. I forgot the main one, Never Turn Your Back on a Friend, which is a gorgeous, beautiful Roger Dean. It's a gatefold out. And that album inside, it doesn't have a lot of songs. Some of them are really sort of conservative, fairly pedestrian. It's got some really mellow stuff. It's not very proggy, that's for sure. But yeah, there's your almost extreme example. It's absolutely iconic Roger Dean. It totally looks like a prog album, and it's not a prog album.
It's not. Yeah. It's got a couple mellow tunes, a couple heavy tunes, and that's it. There's no prog on there at all. Oh, maybe they use Mellotron on one song. Well, now it qualifies, right?
Right. Yeah.
All right. What do we got here? So Pat Travers band. So I'm going to go chronologically here. So let's talk about Putting It Straight first, which I know folks can't really see, but basically on the front and back cover of Putting It Straight, and I know this is kind of small. Let's back up first. So, growing up as a kid, and I'll just tell my experience. I remember living in a bedroom in my parents' basement for, my high school years. And what did I have all around my room? I had posters all over the wall. I had my guitars and amps and records everywhere. And that's just, it was just a place for me and all my stuff. And most of it was all music related, right? So lo and behold, this album comes out, from Pat Travers. And what is he doing? He's hanging in his room, playing his guitar. He's got his effects boxes all over the floor. He's got amps. He's got stuff on the walls. It's just all of a sudden, like, he's one of us. That's what my room looks like. He's got the same room. How cool is that, right? So automatically, the cool factor of this album goes through the roof. And of course, the songs, Getting Better, Life in London. I mean, it's just filled with songs that are like staples in the Pat Travers catalog. So all of a sudden, that instantly becomes a must-hear album, right? It's just he's one of us. The music's got to be just as good, and it is. And then I've talked before. I saved this one for last for a reason. So I have talked many times over the years about how much a great live album is benefited from a great live shot of the band or artist on the cover. I mean, come on. That is just so iconic. You see this, whether you know who Pat Travers is or not, you see this and you're like, that guy looks like he's kicking ass and wailing on the guitar. It's got to be good, right? And then you flip it over and there's the band. How cool do they all look? I'm sold. And granted, this is a great live album. Should have been a double, but it's a great live album. But is it as good if there's just some boring picture of whatever on the front, maybe just the logo? And you can even, I'll even kind of look past the fact that it's just all looks handwritten. It's kind of sloppy looking, but man, that's like one of the great live album cover shots of all time. It rivals like Tokyo Tapes, right, from the Scorpions. I mean, it's just amazing live shot. So to me, coolness 101 right there. But now on the other end, okay, affecting the listening experience on a negative aspect is Radioactive. So again, you see this and like, wow, that's like part 2 of this, right? Because that's a great album cover, and it's the title Radioactive, and he's like, got all this, wonderful effects around him, and Pat looks like he's on fire. It's got to be great. And then you put the album on, and it's like, doesn't quite live up to the coolness of that album cover. New age music is pretty cool. That's what they were playing on the radio. That's a pretty cool tune. But a lot of the rest of it is kind of like really pedestrian and just kind of boring. And it's like you wanted excitement. You wanted lots of guitar, and you don't get it here. And I remember seeing ads in like Hit Parade or Cream magazine when Mercury was doing those ads, and they had like this and the new Rainbow album and Scorpions, and you're like, oh, these great molten metal albums. And I'm like, I'm going to go buy this. And then you see the album cover, you're like, this is great. Music isn't great. What a disappointment. So, again, one of those that works negatively, where they really sell you on the album cover. And for those people who, really love Pat as a guitar hero, and then you get this and you're like, not as much guitar in here as I want. And what's, kind of telling, it's like they list the guys in the band, and of course, then you notice it's already not the same lineup as it was on the previous album. And then, keyboards play a big part in the list of what Pat plays on the album. It's like, that's kind of telling there. But yeah, this an example of how an album cover can affect you in the opposite way.
Yeah. Wow, I could have picked Pat Travers, and I would have had a completely different rant. So here's my Pat Travers rant. When I think of Pat Travers, I think of sunburn and heat. So the first album cover, you got Pat. It looks like he's dying on stage. His hair is all sweaty.
I'm gonna keep talking. I'm gonna grab him because this.
Yeah. So he's all sweaty. He's like, he looks like he's in a hot bar and he's about to pass out. On Making Magic, you've got him like, it's like he's suspended, almost like he's crucified out in a desert. Yeah. So it's like he's being burned alive out in a desert. His legs have already melted off.
They're gone.
The ground. Yeah. You could tell the sun is still hot. Well, his legs are back there, but he's holding his arms up to dry out his armpits, right? because he's been standing in the desert. Yeah. And there's the first one. It's like, look, he's dying from the heat. Yep. He's like about ready to pass out. Yeah. Then you get to crash and burn. So here we go. The heat, you're now on the surface of the sun.
I guess.
Right? Crashed into the surface of the sun. It's the hottest album cover you could possibly imagine, right?
However, the back is awesome.
Well, okay, so in the back, they're all getting sunburned because like they're playing an outdoor gig. At least two of them are, right? So they're out in a hot thing. You can imagine standing in that crowd. You don't have water. It's Woodstock '99 kind of thing. Heat in the street. They're sitting out in a street. Burning, getting a sunburn, getting a suntan. It's so hot. The album's called Heat in the Street. Yeah, there it is. Even more of that. And then the live album itself, like Pat is in a Hawaiian shirt, and on the back, again, outdoor gig, right? Hot, hot, hot outdoor gig. And that always reminded me of the back cover of Van Halen Diver Down, Foghat Live, even the MC5 album, Kick Out the Jams, that's recorded in Grandy Ballroom. I look at that album cover and I just see them sweaty and it looks like they're outside, and it just gives you that heat, hot heat thing. And even I never thought about this because all as you were saying this, oh yeah, I got to mention the heat thing. I never thought of Radioactive that way because it's so blue and green, but it is radioactive. And here he is being burned by radiation on it. You see the little heat marks, right? Yeah. So like every album is just so, it's just so about being out in the sun and getting fried by the sun sort of thing. So yeah. That's what I always think. And the music itself, that it really makes me think celebratory summer music. Like this is not a winter band at all. Like,
right.
It's not a rainy, post-punk new wave thing. It's not doomy and wintry. This is like the ultimate summer band. It's like the David Lee Roth solo albums because of that.
Yeah. But we're not done. Hold on. We might as well keep going. So, Black Pearl, terrible. I mean, yeah. The lettering is just awful. I mean, I like this album, but Jesus, I mean, come on, give us something else. And then how about this one? Hot Shot.
Yeah. Yeah, it's called Hot Shot.
Right.
He's outside. It looks like he's hot. He's probably hot in that suit, right? And on the back, it's a summery, an outdoor summery scene as well, where it looks really hot, right? So, yeah.
I don't know, Mark. We're gonna have to ask Pat that himself when we see him October 1st.
Yeah, exactly.
What was up with all those everything hot something, right?
Yeah.
All right, you got any honorable mentions you want to?
Well, not really. I mean, I could go on forever. I mean, I thought about all these bands that I wanted to include, but I won't really go on about them. But yeah, one of the ones I really felt strongly about, I'll just mention quickly, is Foghat, because I think of the brown period of Foghat, which matches the black and white period of Blue Oyster Cult. But the brown albums of Foghat really makes me think of the brown albums of ZZ Top. And then I also just again on Foghat, I've always made in my head like Night Shift and Stone Blue, they go so perfectly together because again, the album covers look kind of similar on them. They both got, the band, and it's essentially a dark blue, black sort of feel. And then later on, when you've got them going kind of new wavy and minimalist, they do like that weird Tight Shoes album cover and the girls to bounce, like, the red one with the type in the middle. So they got this minimalist thing that they do later on. But I often thought, and then I've mentioned this before, but I even always for my whole life thought, those two records that both came out in '74, Rock and Roll Outlaws and Energized, because one of them had an album cover that matched the first two. I always thought those three brown ones came in order, but it actually goes Energized, then Rock and Roll Outlaws, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, I mean, I just quickly pulled that too. You mentioned Uriah Heep Abominog before, and I know we both love that album quite a bit. But again, how much of that album cover helped steer our love for this album early on? Because you're absolutely right. This came out in the early '80s, the height of the new wave of British heavy metal. And I've talked to many people over the years who love this album cover, and they expected this ultra heavy album. And well, some of it is, some of it really isn't. It's kind of like the whole Demon thing, right? Album covers made you think you get this, it's really not. And then to go back in their catalog, again, Roger Dean again. It's almost like if Roger Dean was associated with the album art, it automatically elevates the albums to classic status. And I don't know many people who would argue that Magician's Birthday and Demons and Wizard aren't among their best albums ever. But how much of that can we attribute back to Roger Dean? And we all love the artwork so much, so it's like we have to love the albums as well, or as much. And the only other one, and I think, Martin, I think this kind of started this whole conversation, is Nazareth. So how many of us love this album and consider it one of their heaviest albums because of this Rodney Matthews artwork? when you really listen to this album, it's really not that heavy.
Mhm.
But our perception of the album itself and the music, I think, is greatly influenced by the artwork. And that could be the same for Expect No Mercy,
Yeah.
and maybe even to an extent Hair of the Dog. You know, these great album covers that scream hard and heavy rock or heavy metal, and really not metal, but we think they are.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially Expect No Mercy, right?
Yeah, it's
Definitely that.
it's funny. I have read and talked to so many people over the years who are like, yeah, that's their heaviest album. And then, like, I listen and I like the album a lot, but I'm like, it's got a couple rockin' tunes, but it's like, it's really not that heavy. It's really not. But we all
Even the
think it
rockin'
is.
tunes on that album, that is when they were kind of, even when they recorded, they weren't in a heavy metal headspace. Like, it's way different sound, even for the heavy songs, than you get back on Hair of the Dog, where you get, a wall of guitars. Like, Hair of the Dog's kind of a little bit like that AC/DC early years To Let There Be Rock sort of feel. It's really powerful. Although Nazareth was pretty darn powerful for Razamanaz too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Loud and proud. I mean, they had a good raw sound there, but yeah, it's funny with Nazareth. Definitely a band elevated by their album covers.
Yep. And what's interesting, on No Mean City, they added Zal Clemenson from the Sensational Alex Harvey band on second guitar. So you think, oh, this has got to be heavier. Yeah. No, not quite. Not quite. Good. Really good album, though. I'm not knocking it. I love it, but it's not as heavy as the cover makes it out to be. So anyway, there you have it.
There were a lot of bands I tried to check what they would do, and they didn't fit this at all. Lou Reed, Iggy Pop, David Bowie. I thought, wow, a lot of albums, a lot of album covers. I'm going to go take a look at these, and none of them really sort of fit into this whole thing. Like none of them really sent you forward favorably or unfavorably, or added much to them, sort of thing. There were some great album covers and stuff, but I think a lot of those also, I noticed that for solo artists, often they tend to just stick the guy's face on the cover, or because it's one guy. It just seemed like an easier thing to do. And when you do that, there's really no messaging one way or another.
Yeah. I also did the same thing. I looked to say, if like an instant story didn't pop in my head, I just went right to the next band. And I wanted to pull out stuff that where I actually feel that I've been influenced by one way or the other by the album cover art. Yeah. So I'm sure there's others that I haven't thought about, but these all struck me right off the bat. I didn't have to look too far. I almost picked Molly Hatchet as well.
Yeah.
Which again, maybe again, that's kind of, I think the Molly Hatchet album covers are kind of like the No Mean City thing. It's like you see these Frank Frazetta album covers and you're like, my God, that's spectacular. This is going to be really, really heavy Southern rock. And it's actually not as heavy as we thought, but expertly played, and quality music, but it gives you one impression, and your listening experience is a little bit swayed again. But again, how many times, myself included, how many times have I said, when you talk about Southern rock and you talk about, the hardest rocking Southern rockers, and Molly Hatchet always comes near the top, but do they actually deserve to be there? I don't know. Exactly. Sometimes I listen to those albums and I'm like, these albums are not heavy at all. It's like you listen to like some of those classic Blackfoot albums versus some of those Molly Hatchet albums, and Blackfoot leaves them in the dust on the heavy factor. Even some Skynyrd stuff does as well. Yeah, great albums. I love the Molly Hatchet albums, but I think we've been used to saying for years, based on those albums covers, that they're a much heavier band than they actually are.
And very, very consistent album covers with the music going up and down in various directions at the same time, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But like Anvil always like, we got to get the Anvil in there somehow, sort of thing, right? So they have, and the logo,
logo's always there, yeah.
And the 3-word titles with the of in the middle and all, and so yeah. That could be another show, right? The bands with really consistent album covers, right?
Because consistency means a lot to a lot of us.
Yeah,
that comes up in conversations all the time. In fact, I was talking to Stephen Reed recently, and he's a stickler for consistency in album cover designs and logos. And I think a lot of us, when we really stop to think about it, when we care about stuff like that, it's mostly people who are into the physical aspect of this. Consistency means a lot. It means a lot. I mean, you and I have talked about this before. We'll go back to Molly Hatchet for a second. They have, throughout all the years, and throughout the fact, no matter who's in the lineup, who's alive, who's not, Molly Hatchet album covers all have the same look and feel. Yeah. All of them. and that means something, right?
It's their way of like distracting you from the lineups changing.
Right. Yes. Like, well, we don't have any original members anymore, but look, the logo is the same, and it's a
brand, the brand. Yeah.
Oh man. All right. Well, there you have it, everybody. Album covers that you can hear, or that can affect your perception of the album positively or negatively. So I'm sure everybody has their own picks that they'll put into the comments below. It'll be interesting to see what everybody comes up with. And yeah, Martin, podcast, Contrarians, books, what's happening on your end?
Well, let's see. Contrarians, I just did El Loco with Ralph, so that'll go up at some point, but there's always shows going up. The podcast, the latest one was The Birth of Stoner Rock. So that's History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. The next one I already did. I did it early. It's just called Self-Titled. So it's about stuff like that. And yeah, books are all at martinpopoff.com.
Cool. And maybe one of these days you'll find that Captain Beyond book that you supposedly wrote.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was a fun conversation.
I read that this morning. I was like, what is this guy talking about?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I have all these I have these, they're called ebooks, but I have all these short documents over at Zunior.com, along with many of my books are on ebooks. And actually some of them I even read out myself. So there's some audiobooks that I did over there. There's only 2 or 3, but unfortunately those, when we broke out those short documents, or I wrote them specifically, and there's like 50 of them over there for like 99 cents. They are called ebooks, but they're only so they've never been in print. And the Captain Beyond thing, I noticed, yeah, it is there, but I mean, it's sort of like a chapter of a book.
Yeah, exactly.
I just kind of interviewed the guys and wrote up the story of one album, sort of thing. So
yeah, that was fun. Nice to wake up and get a laugh in the morning. And I mean, he was
the list things are getting a lot of abuse, right? That I've been doing for Goldmine, these top 20 lists. So the Who one was crazy. I have a very odd, top 20 for Who, and I got a lot of abuse for that. But for Phil Lynot's birthday, we're putting up a top 20 of Thin Lizzy. But when I did that one, I thought, well, I'll just rank every single song. So my Facebook post has every Thin Lizzy song ranked that they ever did, from worst to first. And then from that exercise, I wrote up the top 20, and that's going to be a Goldmine post on.
Yeah, that would be hard to do, man. Pick a band who's got a decent length catalog and rank every single song. Oof.
Yeah. Well, the way I do these things, and it's the way I prepare for these shows too, and you and I do the same thing, but essentially, Thin Lizzy, I looked at it and said, okay, it's only 12 or 13 albums or so. I think it's 12 albums plus a bunch of B-sides and stuff. So it wasn't that long, right? But all you do is you start with the first album, you type in a song name, you listen to the next song, you type it above or below, you listen to the next song, you type it above or below, and you just fill it in like that until it's done, right?
Yeah. It's the upper part of the list that really matters, right? That's actually really heartfelt. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
Although I got a lot of abuse for putting Still in Love with You from the 7th to last best Thin Lizzy song. So I had to argue with a few people about that one. But
I love reading the fury of Monty Connor, man. I love when he jumps in. I'm like,
Monty, because Monty's he's so invested in the idea that hits are hits for a reason. That's why they're iconic. They are the best ones. So if Monty was to go and do these lists, he never does. He just complains about our lists. But if he did go do his lists, you generally would see that the hits super high sort of thing. So that's this whole cool debate about, our hits there for a reason. I mean, you put the A&R hat on, and our hits, that first they're picked from an album to be the great song. So everybody's kind of thinking, well, that's kind of special, that one. But then there is a push too. There's push it to radio, push it down our throats. There's got to be some looseness there where some of your favorites aren't the hits, right?
I agree with you 100%. I've been saying that for decades, that I think I'm not knocking that a lot of the hits aren't great songs, but there are other great songs on a lot of these albums that if they had the push on radio, we heard time and time and time again, every time we turned the radio on or watched MTV, we would think the same of those songs, but those weren't the ones chosen, right?
Yeah. Because familiarity is infectious, right? I mean, that's the whole point about familiarity. You get familiar with it, you like it more, you get more familiar with it. It's a feedback loop, right?
Right. Yeah, it's the same argument I have with people who talk about, they're our age and they talk about, there's no good albums being released anymore. Yeah, you talked highly about this one album. I gave it a listen. It didn't quite strike me, and I won't listen to it again. I'm like, well, but 40 years ago, when you first got Number of the Beast, did you absolutely 100% fall in love with it the very first time you heard it? Maybe or maybe not. But how many times did you listen to it over the 6 months, a year after it came out? Probably a ton, right? There's a reason why it became one of your favorite albums of all time, because you spent a lot of time with it. So how can you just discount a new album by a newer band, or even one of the bands you love, after one quick little listen on Spotify or on YouTube? It's not the same, right? You gave those other albums all those chances. Same thing with radio, right? Same thing with hits. It's like we had no choice but to hear these songs over and over and over and
You're
over.
in the car, which is a great place to hear music, right? You're loving it, right? You're on the beach, whatever, right? You're with people, right? So it's a communal experience, often radio, right?
Yeah, which we don't have anymore. I don't think listening to music is that anymore. Right now, it's a very solitary thing. You listen on your computer, on your phone, and one and done, you got to move on to something else. It's a shame. It's a shame. Anyway, we've gotten way off topic here. So anyway, there you have it, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. All together, all the damn time. Please go check out all of Martin's outlets. And stay tuned tomorrow. We've got the UK Connection. And then on Sunday, we've got the Curse of the Collector back again this month. So we'll see you all then. For Martin Popoff, I'm Pete Pardo. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. See you next Friday. Take care. Bye-bye.